SKYLINE presents Villette. The book is for Charlotte Brontë. Volume 1, Chapter 2, Paulina. Some days elapsed, and it appeared she was not likely to take much of a fancy to anybody in the house. She was not exactly naughty or willful. She was far from disobedient, but an object less conducive to comfort, to tranquillity ever, than she presented it was scarcely possible to have before one's eyes. She marked, no grown person could have performed that uncheering business better. No furrowed face of adult exile, longing for Europe, at Europe's antidote, ever bore more legibly the signs of homesickness than did her infant visage. She seemed growing old and unearthly. I, Lucy Snowy, plead guiltless of that curse, an overhated and discursive imagination. But whenever, opening a room door, I found her seated in a corner alone, her head on her pygmy hand, the room seemed to me not inhabited but haunted. And again, when the moonlight nights, on waking, I beheld her figure, white and conspicuous, in its night dress, kneeling upright in bed and praying like some Catholic or Methodist enthusiast, some precautions fanatic, or untimely saint. I scarcely know what thought I had, but they ran risk of being hardly more rational and healthy than that child's mind must have been. I seldom caught a word for her prayers, for they were whispered low. Sometimes, indeed, they were not whispered at all, but put up unuttered, such rare sentences as reached my ears still bore the burden. Papa, my dear Papa. This, I perceived, was a one-ideaed nature, betraying that monomaniac tendency I have ever thought the most unfortunate, with which men or women can be cursed. What might have been the end of this breeding, had it continued unchecked, can only be conjectured. It received, however, a sudden turn. One afternoon, Mrs. Bretton, coaxing her from the usual situation in a corner, had lifted her into the window seat, and, by occupying her attention, told her to watch the passengers and count how many ladies should go down the street in a given minute. She had sat listlessly, hardly looking, and no counting, when, my eyes being fixed on hers, when I witnessed, in its irid and pupil, a startling transfiguration, these sudden, dangerous natures, sensitive as they are called, offer many a curious spectacle to those whom a cooler temperament had secured from participation in that angular vagaries. The fixed and heavy gaze swung, trembled, then glittered. In foyer, the small overcast brow cleared, the trivial and dejected features lit up, the sad countenance vanished, and in its place appeared a sudden eagerness, an intense expectancy. It is, were her words, like a bird or a shaft, or any other swift thing. She was gone from the room. How she got the house door open I cannot tell. Probably it might be ajar. Perhaps Warren was in the way and obeyed her behest, which would be impetuous enough. I, watching calmly from the window, saw her. In her black frock and tiny braided apron, to pinafores, To pinafores she had an antipathy, dropped off the length of the streets, and as I was on the point of turning and quietly announcing to Mrs. Brontë that the child was run out mad and ought instantly to be pursued, I saw her get up and rap at once from my cool observation and from the wondering stare of the passengers. A gentleman had done this good turn and now, covering her with his cloak, advanced to restore her to the house whence he had seen her issue. I concluded he would leave her in a servant's charge and withdrew. But he entered, having tarried a little while below. He came upstairs. His reception immediately explained that he was known to Mrs. Brontë. She recognized him. She greeted him. And yet she was flattered, surprised, forsaken, unawares. Her look and manners were even expostulatory, and in reply to these, rather than her words, he said, "I could not help it, madam. I found it possible to leave the country without seeing my own eyes how she seated." "But you have seen her?" "I hope not. And how is Papa's little Polly?" This question he addressed to Paulina, as he sat down and placed her gently on the playground before him. "How is Polly, Papa?" was the reply, as she leaned on her knee and gazed up into his face. It was not a noisy, not a worthy scene, for that I was thankful, but it was a scene of feeling too brimful, and which, because of the cup, did not foam up high or furiously overflow, only oppressed one thing more. On all occasions of vehement, unrestrained expansion, a scene of disdain or ridicule comes to the wary spectator's relief, whereas I have felt more burdensome that sort of sensibility which bends of its own will, a giant slave under the sway of good sense. Mrs. Home was a stern-featured, perhaps I should rather say, a hard-featured man. His forehead was knotty, his cheekbones were marked and prominent. The character of his face was quite Scotch, but there was feeling in his eyes, an emotion in his now agitated countenance. His northern accent is speaking harmonized with his physiognomy. He was at once proud-looking and homely-looking. He laid his hand on the child, uplifted her. She said, "Kiss Polly." He kissed her. I wished she would utter some hysterical cry, so that I might get relief and be at ease. She made wonderfully little noise. She seemed to have got what she wanted, all she wanted, and to be in a trance of content. Neither in mien nor features was this creature like her son, and yet she was on his train. Her mind has been filled from his, as the cup from the flagon. Undisputably, Mr. Home owned manly self-control, however he might secretly feel on some matters. "Polly," he said, looking down on the little girl, "go into the hall. You will see Papa's great coat lying on a chair. Put your hand into the pockets. You'll find a pocket handkerchief. Bring it to me." She obeyed, went and returned deftly and nimbly. He was talking to Mrs. Brontë when she came back, and she waited with a handkerchief in her hand. It was a picture, in its way, to see her, with a tiny stature and trim, neat shave, standing on his knee. Seeing that he continued to talk, apparently unconscious of her return, she took his hand, opened the unresisting fingers, inserted into the handkerchief and glued them upon it one by one. He still seemed not to see her or feel her, but by and by, he lifted her to his knee. She nested against him, and though neither looked out or spoke to the other for an hour following, as both were satisfied. During tea, the minutes, things, movements, and behaviour gave, as usual, full occupation to the eye. First she directed Warren as she placed her the chairs. "Put Papa's chairs here, and mine near it. Between Papa and Mrs. Brontë, I must hand this tea." She took her own seat and beckoned with her hand to the father. "Be near me, as if we were at home, Papa." And again, as she intercepted his cup in passing, and would stir the sugar and put in on the cream herself. "I always did it for you at home, Papa. Nobody could do it as well, not even your own self." Throughout the meal, she continued her attentions. Rather absurd they were. The sugar tongs were too wide for one of her hands, and cream aware, and she had to use both in wielding them. The bread and butter plates, the very cup and saucer, tasked her insufficient strength and dexterity, but she would lift this and that, and likely contribute through it all to break nothing. Candidly speaking, I thought her a little busybody, but her father, blind like other parents, seemed perfectly content to let her wait on him, and even wonderfully soothed by her offices. "She's my comfort," he could not help saying to Mrs. Brontë. That lady had her own comfort. Nonpareil as much larger scale, and for the moment absent. So she sympathized with his foible. The second comfort came on the stage in the course of the evening. I knew this lady had been fixed for his return, and was aware that Mrs. Brontë had been expecting him throughout all its hours. We were seated around the fire after tea when Graham joined our circle. I should rather say, broke it up, for, of course, his arrival met a bustle, and then, as Mr. Graham was fasting, there was refreshment to be provided. He and Mr. Home met as old acquaintance of the little girl. He took no notes for a time. His meal over, and numerous questions from his mother answered, he turned from the table to the hearth. Opposite where he had placed himself was seated Mr. Home, and his elbow the child. When I say child, I use inappropriate and undescriptive term, a term suggesting any picture rather than that of the demure little person in a morning frock and white chemisette that might have fitted a good-sized doll. Perched now on a hard chair beside a stand, whereon was her toy work box of white varnished wood, and holding in her hands a shred of her handkerchief, which she was professing up to him, and by which she bowed perseveringly with a needle that in her fingers seemed almost a skewer, pricking herself even on a knife, making the cambric with a track of minute red dots, occasionally starting when the perverse weapon, swerving from her control, inflicted a deeper stab than usual, but still silent, diligent, absorbed, womanly. Graham was at that time a handsome, faithless-looking youth of 16. I say faithless-looking, not because he was really a very perfidious disposition, but because the epithet strikes me as proper to describe the fair, Celtic, not Saxon, character of his good looks. His waved light auburn hair, his supple symmetry, his smile frequent, and destitute neither of fascination nor of subtlety. In no bad sense, a spoiled, whimsical boy he was in those days. "Mother," he said, after eyeing the little figure before him in silence for some time, and when the temporary absence of Mr. Home from the room relieved him from the half-laughing bashfulness, which was all he knew of timidity. "Mother, I see a young lady in the present society, to whom I have never been introduced." "Mr. Holmes' little girl, I suppose you mean," said his mother. "Indeed, ma'am," replied her son, "I consider your expressions of the least ceremonious. Miss Home, I should certainly have said, in venturing to speak of the gentlewoman to whom I allude. Now, Graham, I will not have the child teased. Don't flatter yourself that I shall suffer you to make her your butt." "Miss Home," pursued Graham, and undeterred by his mother's remonstrance, "may I have the honour to introduce myself, since no one else seems willing to render you and me that service. Your slave, John Graham Bretton." She looked at him. He rose and bowed quite gravely. She deliberately put down thimble, scissors, work, descended with precaution from her perch, and curtsying with unspeakable seriousness, said, "How do you do? I have the honour to be in fair health, only in some measure figured with a hurried journey. I hope, ma'am, I see you well." "So terribly well," was the ambitious reply of the little woman, and she now essayed to regain her former elevation, but finding this could not be done without some climbing and straining, a sacrifice of decorum not to be thought of, and being utterly disdainful, a fade in the presence of a strange young gentleman. She relinquished the high chair for a low stool. Towards that low stool, Graham drew in his chair. "I hope, ma'am, the present residence, my mother's house, appeared to you a convenient place of abode." "Not particularly. I want to go home." "A natural and laudable desire, ma'am, but one which, notwithstanding, I should do my best to oppose. I reckon I'll be able to get out of you a little of that precious commodity called amusement, which Ma'am and Mistress Snowy, they have failed to yield me. I shall have to go with Papa soon. I shall not stay long at your mother's." Yes, you'll stay with me, I'm sure. I have a pony on which you shall ride, and no end of books with pictures to show you. Are you going to live here now?" "I am." "Does that please you? Do you like me?" "No." "Why?" "I think you're queer." "My face, ma'am?" "Your face and all about you. You have long red hair." "Auburn hair, if you please, ma'am." "Mamma calls it auburn or golden, or so do all her friends." but even with my long red hair, and he waved his mane with a sort of triumph, telling himself well knew that it was, and was proud of the leonine blue. I cannot possibly be queer, that in your ladyship. You call me queer? Certainly. I suppose. I think I should go to bed. It's bad. A little thing like you ought to have been in bed many hours ago, in many hours since, but you probably stay up in the expectation of seeing me. Oh, indeed. You certainly wish to enjoy the pleasure of my society. You know I was coming home. I will wait to have a look at me. I sat up for Papa, and not for you. Very good, Miss Home. I'm going to be your favourite. Before Papa soon, I dare say. She wished Mrs. Bretton and myself good night. She seemed hesitating whether Graham's deserts entitled him to the same attention, when he caught her with one hand, and with that one hand held her poser aloft above his head. She saw herself thus lifted up on high, in the glass over the fireplace. The suddenness, the freedom, the disrespect of the action were too much. For shame, Mr. Graham, was her indignant cry. Put me down. And when again on her feet, and what would you think of me if I were to treat you in that way, lifting you with my hand, raising the mighty member, as one would lift a little cat? So saying, she departed.